Thank you, Rupert. I wanted to follow up on Elizabeth's question. Um, so in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a practice called dream yoga, where the goal eventually is to fall asleep consciously. And so when practicing this uh, technique, one relaxes deeply and, say, remain in being. And there's an eventual moment when the body, the sensations of the body cease. And it's, in my experience, it's abrupt. And all of a sudden, I feel like I'm floating. And I could say that I'm in dreamless sleep. And if I'm patient, then dreams emerge, and they come and go as thoughts. But if I remain in dreamless sleep, in a relaxed way, then there's a sense of rupture, in the same way that Elizabeth was describing, where all of a sudden it feels physically as if I were falling down, and there's a lot of light, as if, like the neutral state would become very non-neutral and very intense and lit, a lot of light that feels like physical light, but of course it doesn't have a source, it just comes from everywhere. And so I've been struggling or trying to determine whether that practice is in any way helpful when I contrast what we do here, say in the morning, and I feel like I'm able to, in a very relaxed way, be. And there's eventually that sense of similarity with dreamless sleep, but with all the senses open, at least when we're in the wake state, to hear, and everything is happening without necessarily allocating or focusing attention anywhere. And so my question now is, to what extent, if I were to remain in being, could this rupturing, to call it somehow, this falling into light happens? Or if you could provide some guidance between the parallels of dreamless sleep, remaining in dreamless sleep, and waking being, and if they meet, if this experience is in any way any indication of anything. I guess that's my question.
Yes, okay. I'm not sure that I completely understand this rupture or this falling, but let me respond anyway, and then you can tell me if I'm not responding to your question. So this Tibetan practice of dream yoga, what we do here is it's deeper than that, really. It's deep sleep yoga. We practice falling asleep, falling deeply asleep, whilst remaining awake. You know the story I told a couple of days ago when somebody asked Ramana Maharshi about a sage, Madhacharya, and the student asked, well, why did Madhacharya say this? And Ramana Maharshi said, you have to ask him. I don't know, you have to ask him. And the guy said, well, I can't, because he's dead. And to which Ramana Maharshi responded, so am I. Well, what he meant was, I'm deeply asleep. Don't ask me, I'm deeply asleep. I'm just abiding in being. That's all I can tell you about. I'm not giving my attention to thoughts and perceptions. I'm just abiding in being. So Ramana Maharshi was deeply asleep whilst remaining awake. That's what we do here. It's another way of describing our meditations, and not just our meditations. It's what Meister Eckhart means when he said our life should be simply being. To the extent that we lead our life as simply being, to that extent we lead a life in God. It's the same thing. It's what he meant. Just remain in deep sleep. Always. Either in the presence of thoughts and perceptions, or in the presence of images, presence of sensations, or in the absence of thoughts and perceptions. It doesn't matter. Remain in deep sleep, always. In other words, remain as being, always. And that's really what we do here. We practice falling asleep whilst remaining awake.
Yeah, I guess it's similar, the practice. In fact, you start dream yoga, you start with dreams, but the eventual goal is to release a dream instead of obsessing with playing with the dream.
Okay,
eventually you witness it dissolving, and while you're remaining in dreamless sleep, which one could call deep sleep, then you just stay there, and that's when these
But remember, deep sleep is not a state that we enter. It is just the natural state of natural condition of being prior to the arising of experience. So deep sleep is the natural condition of being, which is present all the time. Our being now is in the same condition that it is in when we're deeply asleep. When thoughts and images arise in being, we call it the dream state. When sensations and perceptions are added to thoughts and images, we call it the waking state. But being always remains the same. Then when the sensations and perceptions vanish, leaving only thoughts and images, we call it the dream state. Then when thoughts and images vanish, we call it the deep sleep state. The deep sleep state is only a state in reference to these other two states. But from its own point of view, it is not a state. It is just its eternal condition. It's only a state in reference to waking and dreaming. But from its own experience, it is not a state. It is just the eternal nature of being. And being is in, right now, our being is in the same condition that it is in when we are deeply asleep. Only now it is colored by thoughts, images, sensations, and perceptions. And when we're deeply asleep, it's no longer colored. That's why it's peaceful. But actually, our being now is what we call deeply asleep. It is, and that's what it means to remain. To be deeply asleep whilst remaining awake. It means to remain as being. It's the practice of the presence of God. Or to pray without ceasing. It means to remain as being in the midst of experience or in the absence of experience.